Hi Year 6, Mrs Cox going to read the book above pay grade, our new one, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by J.K. Rowling. So the last time you had book above pay grade, it would have been Harry Potter himself, Daniel Radcliffe, who read chapter 1, which was The Boy Who Lived. So today we're going to read part 1 of chapter 2, The Vanishing Glass, and we're going to be reading pages 19 to 22. You'll see that there's some questions, as usual, for book above pay grade, your Vipers questions, and on the little slideshow there are the questions, and if you move on through the slideshow there's also the answers typed up for you, although I'll go through them as we go, as usual. So here we go. Chapter 2, The Vanishing Glass. Nearly 10 years had passed since the Dursleys had woken up to find their nephew on the front step, but Privet Drive had hardly changed at all. The sun rose on the same tidy front gardens and lit up the brass number 4 on the Dursleys' front door. It crept into their living room, which was almost exactly the same as it had been on the night when Mr Dursley had seen that fateful news report about the owls. Only the photographs on the mantelpiece really showed how much time had passed. 10 years ago, there had been lots of pictures of what looked like a large pink beach ball wearing different coloured bobble hats. But Dudley Dursley was no longer a baby, and now the photograph showed a large blonde boy riding his bicycle on a roundabout at the fair, playing a computer game with his father, being hugged and kissed by his mother. The room held no sign at all that another boy lived in the house too. Yet Harry Potter was still there, asleep at the moment, but not for long. His Aunt Petunia was awake, and it was her shrill voice which made the first noise of the day. "Up! Get up! Now!" Harry woke with a start. His aunt rapped on the door again. "Up!" she screeched. Harry heard her walking towards the kitchen, and then the sound of the frying pan being put on the cooker. He rolled onto his back and tried to remember the dream he had been having. It had been a good one. There had been a flying motorbike in it. He had a funny feeling that he'd had the same dream before. His aunt was back outside the door. "Are you up yet?" she demanded. "Nearly," said Harry. "Well, get a move on. I want you to look after the bacon. And don't you dare let it burn. I want everything perfect on Duddy's birthday." Harry groaned. "What did you say?" his aunt snapped through the door. Nothing. Dudley's birthday. How could he have forgotten? Harry got slowly out of bed and started looking for socks. He found a pair under his bed, and after pulling off a spider from one of them, put them on. Harry was used to spiders, because the cupboard under the stairs was full of them, and that was where he slept. That's our first question today. It's a retrieval question. Where did Harry sleep? Have a little think, and we'll talk about the answer in a moment. So it says in the text, Harry was used to spiders because the cupboard under the stairs was full of them, and that was where he slept. So Harry slept in a cupboard under the stairs. When he was dressed, he went down the hall into the kitchen. The table was almost hidden beneath all of Dudley's birthday presents. It looked as though Dudley had got the new computer he wanted, not to mention the second television and the racing bike. Exactly why Dudley wanted a racing bike was a mystery to Harry, as Dudley was very fat and hated exercise, unless, of course, it involved punching somebody. Dudley's favourite punch bag was Harry, but he couldn't often catch him. Harry didn't look it, but he was very fast. Perhaps it had something to do with living in a dark cupboard, but Harry had always been small and skinny for his age. He looked even smaller and skinnier than he really was, because all he had to wear were old clothes of Dudley's, and Dudley was about 4 times bigger than he was. Harry had a thin face, knobbly knees, black hair, and bright green eyes. He wore round glasses held together with a lot of sellotape, because of all the times Dudley had punched him on the nose. The only thing Harry liked about his own appearance was a very thin scar on his forehead, which was shaped like a bolt of lightning. He had had it as long as he could remember, and the first question he could ever remember asking his Aunt Petunia was how he had got it. In the car crash when your parents died, she'd said. And don't ask questions. Don't ask questions. That was the first rule for a quiet life with the Dursleys. Uncle Vernon entered the kitchen as Harry was turning over the bacon. Comb your hair, he barked by way of a morning greeting. About once a week, Uncle Vernon looked over the top of his newspaper and shouted that Harry needed a haircut. Harry must have had more haircuts than the rest of the boys in his class put together, but it made no difference. His hair simply grew that way, all over the place. Harry was frying eggs by the time Dudley arrived in the kitchen with his mother. Dudley looked a lot like Uncle Vernon. He had a large pink face, not much neck, small, watery blue eyes, and thick blonde hair that lay smoothly on his thick, fat head. Aunt Petunia often said that Dudley looked like a baby angel. Harry often said that Dudley looked like a pig in a wig. Harry put the plates of egg and bacon on the table, which was difficult as there wasn't much room. Dudley, meanwhile, was counting his presents. His face fell. 36, he said, looking up at his mother and father. That's 2 less than last year. Darling, you haven't counted Auntie Marge's presents, see? It's here underneath this big one from Mummy and Daddy. All right, 37 then, said Dudley, going red in the face. Harry could see that there was a huge Dudley tantrum coming on. He began wolfing down his bacon as fast as possible in case Dudley turned the table over. Aunt Petunia obviously scented danger too, because she said very quickly, and we'll buy you another 2 presents while we're out today. How's that, Popkin? 2 more presents. Is that all right? Dudley thought for a moment. It looked like it was hard work. Finally, he said slowly, so I'll have 39, sweetum, said Aunt Petunia. Oh, Dudley sat down heavily and grabbed the nearest parcel. All right then. Uncle Vernon chuckled. Little tyke, he wants his money's worth, just like his father. Attaboy, Dudley. He ruffled Dudley's hair. At that moment the telephone rang, and Aunt Petunia went up to answer it while Harry and Uncle Vernon watched Dudley unwrap the racing bike, a cine camera, a remote control aeroplane, 16 new computer games and a video recorder. He was ripping the paper off a gold wristwatch when Aunt Petunia came back from the telephone looking both angry and worried. Bad news, Vernon, she said. Mrs. Figg's broken her leg. She can't take him. She jerked her head in Harry's direction. Dudley's mouth fell open in horror, but Harry's heart gave a leap. Every year, on Dudley's birthday, his parents took him and a friend out for the day, to adventure parks, hamburger bars, or the cinema. Every year, Harry was left behind with Mrs. Figg, a mad old lady who lived 2 streets away. Harry hated it there. The whole house smelled of cabbage, and Mrs. Figg made him look at photographs of all the cats she'd ever owned. Now what? Said Aunt Petunia, looking furiously at Harry, as though he'd planned all this. Harry knew he ought to feel sorry that Mrs. Figg had broken her leg, but it wasn't easy when he reminded himself that it would be a whole year before he had to look at Tibbles and Snowy and Mr. Pauls and Tufty again. We could phone Marge, Uncle Vernon suggested. Don't be silly, Vernon, she hates the boy. The Dursleys often spoke about Harry like this, as though he wasn't there, or rather, as though he was something very nasty that they couldn't understand, like a slug. What about, what's her name, your friend, Yvonne, on holiday in Mallorca, snapped Aunt Petunia. You could just leave me here, Harry put in hopefully. He'd be able to watch what he wanted on television for a change, and maybe even have a go on Dudley's computer. Aunt Petunia looked as though she'd just swallowed a lemon. And come back and find the house in ruins, she snarled. I won't blow up the house, said Harry, but they weren't listening. I suppose we could take him to the zoo, said Aunt Petunia slowly. And leave him in the car? That car's new. He's not sitting in it alone. Dudley began to cry loudly. In fact, he wasn't really crying. It had been years since he'd really cried, but he knew that if he screwed up his face and he wailed, his mother would give him anything he wanted. Oh, Dinky Diddydums, don't cry. Mummy won't let him spoil your special day, she cried, flinging her arms around him. I don't want him to Dudley yelled between huge pretend sobs. "He always spoils everything!" He shot Harry a nasty grin through the gap in his mother's arms. Just then the doorbell rang. "Oh, good Lord, they're here," said Aunt Petunia frantically, and a moment later Dudley's best friend, Piers Polkiss, walked in with his mother. Piers was a scrawny boy with a face like a rat. He was usually the one who held people's arms behind their backs while Dudley hit them. Dudley stopped pretending to cry at once. So that's the end of the chapter part that we're going to read today, but there are 2 other questions. So the first question is a summarise question. Can you summarise, in this part of the chapter, it is clear that Harry has a difficult time with the Dursleys. Summarise the things that tell the reader that he has a difficult life there. Have a think, there's quite a lot of things that could tell the reader that. So straight away we know that the Aunt Petunia, shouts at Harry first thing in the morning and bosses him about and makes him cook their breakfast. There are no photos of Harry at all in the house, although there are several of Dudley, their son. It's as if Harry doesn't even exist. He's made to sleep underneath the stairs in a cupboard with spiders. Dudley beats him up all the time. He's got sellotape on his glasses where they're constantly getting broken. Harry has to wear Dudley's old clothes, which are far too big for him. And his uncle shouts at him as well. As a good morning, he tells him he has to get his hair cut. Doesn't even notice that he's there and greet him properly. And finally, they talk about Harry as if he's not even there. And they use the tone of voice that suggests that he's something rather repulsive, like a slug or something. And the final question today is a predict question. So we know that they're going to take Dudley and his friend to the zoo, and at the moment they're struggling to think of what to do with Harry. They've thought about maybe him staying at home for the day, or perhaps just staying in the car when they go, but they're both concerned that if they do that he'll absolutely wreck everything. So you have to predict, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that they're going to take Harry to the zoo? Or do you think that they'll leave Harry either in the car or at home alone for the day so that he doesn't spoil Dudley's birthday? And whatever they decide, what do you think the consequences are going to be? Have a think. So everything in the text suggests that Harry is going to be going to the zoo. The fact that it talks in the text about how he never gets to go on any of the trips and really builds it up. And the fact that they've decided that they don't really want to leave him at home alone and left to his own devices. So it looks as if it's suggesting that Harry's going to go to the zoo. But we also know that they seem to think that if Harry comes with them, something bad is going to happen. And he does seem to get the blame for everything. So it is highly likely that Harry will go to the zoo, and probably likely that something bad is going to happen. We know that Dudley beats him up all the time, and perhaps that's something that's going to happen. So we'll find out when we have the next Book Above Pay Grade session and we read the second part of chapter 2. Bye.